supporting cast later on. But really, the goal of that meeting is to come out of it with enough information to create a 2D layout. After we've iterated on that layout a little bit, we're ready to have what we call the art kickoff meeting. This is where we get all of the stakeholders who are going to be building and creating and bringing this dungeon to life into a room, and we have a bit of a brainstorm. I call it a brain dump, really. We just kind of talk about all the information that's come up to that point. And we do a lot of brainstorming in there, too, to discuss, like, what's the purpose of this room? What is in this area? What would this boss be in? After we have that meeting, we're ready to go into full-blown production at that point. What's the purpose of this room? A few weeks later, we should have a 3D blockout that we can put into the game and actually start running around in and placing creatures and bosses. And at that point, we're ready to get the rest of the team, the Encounter team up here involved, and have a similar meeting where we discuss the ecology of the dungeon and the bosses in there. We're not ready for brainstorming at that point for the mechanics and abilities, but really we're just talking about, like, what are the actual bosses, right? What is this thing that I'm punching? Is it a big sea creature, or what is it? We really want this group to be geeked out about what we're building, so we often kick around.
All right, guys, welcome back. We are joined now by World of Warcraft Creative Director Alex Afrasiabi. What's going on?
Space this guy is in and how we actually put the dungeon layout together.
Thanks, Johnny. As Morgan said earlier, one of the very first things we do when designing a dungeon is create a layout for it. This is it's like a blueprint for the zone. Because we draw this out on paper and it's a 2D image, we're able to iterate on it very quickly. We can change the layout of the rooms.
That man, the guy that's talking, he's really low on the microphone.
A hallway or a chapel or things like that. Once
Probably shy.
we figured all this out, we can give this blueprint to the artists and designers, and they have something to start on when they're
getting gear to replace my
Hades.
Hades.
Not
the shit gear.
Shrine of the Storms, with this really cool concept piece that one of our concept artists made.
Drops the 3 bosses, both in Halo.
We got really excited and geeked up about going along the cliffs underneath the Kraken and walking across the bridge and actually seeing the dungeon take place around it. So with that in mind, we created this layout that we're going to show you right now. So in this layout, we start in the bottom of the zone along a sea bluff or a cliff, and we walk underneath the Kraken motif up to the area where we're going to fight the first boss. That's the boss we're going to talk about today, and we're going to design. Once players defeat this boss, they can walk across the bridge, and they get a better view of the motif from the front, and they'll face a second boss in an area where they have tons of fountains, and it's where they cleanse themselves before entering the chapel. Finally, they'll walk across the bridge underneath the Kraken tentacles that are wrapped around the bridge itself, and you enter their actual cathedral where they perform these rituals on these ships. So with that in mind, we can start talking about the boss.
So 2 things real quick before we start brainstorming the boss. I want to share with you guys our only rule during our brainstorms, which is that there are no bad ideas in a brainstorm. This is a safe place to just fling ideas at the wall, see what sticks, see what people like. One of the most common phrases that we hear in these brainstorming meetings, you might even hear here today, Ted, feel free to steal this one, is, so this is a really bad idea, but, and then they throw out usually a really bad idea. It's usually not good. But the reason we do that and the value in that is that it might inspire somebody else to come up with something really cool, or somebody else might take that idea and roll with it. Like we were saying, this is a super collaborative process. So you just want to throw everything out there. So the things that you hear us saying up there, we know that not all of it is great. That's why we're here. And last but not least, like we mentioned, we've never talked about this water elemental before. We don't know what he's going to do. This is all on the fly. This is all off the cuff. So with that said, let's start talking. What do we got?
So you said that this is summoned by the Sea Priest. Is he going to be, do we want him to be in the room when that happens? Do you want to see him like come out of the water in that epic reveal moment, or?
Oh, definitely. Up to us whether we want him to actually be in the room during the fight or not, you know, doing kind of a background lead-up sort of thing, but definitely want to pay off that big moment of the head Sea Priest channeling all of his power and raising the ocean itself into our boss.
I think we kind of want to use the Sea Priest guy for later, so I want to keep the focus on the water elemental itself.
Okay.
You can see him in the background, like maybe he's on the bridge, like the one that we have to cross after we beat the boss. Maybe he's back when he summoned it, and then he just pieces out. Like
Oh,
fades
sure,
away
like-
into the darkness.
Just like a reveal. So does that mean that the room is flooded if the water elemental is coming out of something? Like, doesn't have to be like at least like knee-deep water.
That's a good point. We should probably figure out the room, huh? We have this layout, but that doesn't mean, like, I mean, we had the picture earlier where we were like chest high on them. Does that mean we're playing against
Oof.
torso boss, or does
Yeah,
that mean we
then it's
can-
really hard to see like area denial on the ground.
Then again, we can always change that. He's whatever we want him to be. Like, he could be in the middle of this platform. He could be hanging off the side of it. It's whatever we want. So
I mean, you have the water source on the side, so you can summon him out of the water onto the platform. The size or his mobility, you know, Immersius obviously comes to mind, a very iconic water elemental boss. But it seems to me like it's a pretty large platform there. It's something you can probably play with a lot in terms of where the boss spawns. Maybe he is immobile, but maybe he can kind of go into the ground, out of the ground in different areas too.
So here's a bad idea. What if whenever he's in physical form and you can actually punch him in the watery face, there's no water in the room, but whenever he submerges, he just like floods the room and now you're like swimming or something. Or like there's like a different threat that comes out, like sharks or piranhas or squid or something can finally like come out of the ocean.
Ken knows a thing or two about that.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Something that's cool about a water elemental like this is it can have a lot of different shapes. Like it actually could turn into a wave that washes over the platform, and you could play into what Ted was talking about of like maybe he starts out off the cliffside. He is so large that you're fighting him from the waist up, but then he turns in a wave and crashes onto the play space, and now
Gross.
maybe there's more than one of him, or
The way I see it from kind of the player fantasy going in, there's that this guy's trying to defend his temple, he's trying to defend his dungeon, make
That
sure
works
nobody
too
gets
slow.
through that door and see kind of what's going on. And you guys have this idea where it's on the cliff side, so it makes sense to me to have a water elemental boss that's
don't run
literally trying
back.
to wash you off the side of the cliff. So maybe there's a kind of wave thing you guys
What
can
is
do
wrong
where,
with this
where
guy?
if players don't move out of the way and they're going off the side of the cliff.
No, that's totally cool. We've done that in the past in like the Alakir fight. It was a big elemental guy on a platform, and if you got pushed off, it wasn't game over
Every
for
time
you.
we're
You
getting
didn't
combat,
necessarily
he
die.
fucking
We
runs
just
back to
gave you
the-
a very flashy return back to the platform that just so happened to take you out of the game for like 12 seconds.
I'm
as, like, a
escorting
punishment,
from this
but not
to-
necessarily game over. That's totally something we can do here.
a dolphin that rescue
Show me where the tire
a
stone
dolphin could
is.
rescue you.
And every
Heck
time I
yeah.
get in
Flying
combat, he
dolphins.
runs
What was
back
the Shadow
to
Burial?
Yeah.
beginning
boss?
pretty much.
He was like trying to pull you off the platform though. This guy could be like splashing you with water, trying to blast you off of it though, like just
Yeah.
the inverse of it. But it's kind of what you'd
So
expect a
annoying.
water elemental to do.
Yeah, and so I guess another big question is most of our water elemental bosses like that look like this have been sessile, which means they can't move. Is that a direction we want to go here? Do we want him to just like submerge and show up somewhere else like Raiden, or do we want him to actually be mobile if the room is flooded with water? Like, can we get like a cool like evocative anime of him walking around the water,
Scooting.
or just scooting around?
I think it could be cool. Like, I really like Ted's idea about flooding the room and doing the water thing. You could almost imagine an A/B alternating sort of thing of he's against the cliff, he's very large, he's very imposing, and when the area is covered in water, now he has that kind of, it's his element, so to speak, right? And he can actually move around and come after you. Maybe he's a wave, maybe it's his model, he scales down some. There's lots of options there.
I think we should try to avoid the waist up boss for this one. Usually when we do that, it's like, when you think of just scale, right?
Right.
If you think of bosses that are that size in a dungeon, you think of Helya, you think of Wrath of Ajara, like those are always the end boss. Because if we start with a boss that's this big, we're gonna be punching like the pinky toe of our last boss if we wanna make it not feel less epic for the last boss. So I think with this guy, we wanna go something not waist up. Maybe it is a mobile version, like if we actually got like, I'd have to think about what animations Immersius has, but like he looks like the Warcraft 3 water elemental, right? Who's just like kind of scoots around.
Yeah, scooting. That's a good word for it. What if? So do we want it to just be this one elemental, or the cool thing about water is that it can just sort of disperse and it can become whatever it wants to? We want to do the thing where like it splits into 2, and then you can like cleave it, and then it splits into 4, and then you can start AOEing it and go crazy.
Kind of like how Tectus ran.
Yeah.
Was that Tectus?
Well, Tectus would you'd get him down and he'd split into two guys.
Yeah,
that sort
he
of thing.
like kept duplicating. That was cool. And the mechanics were even duplicating also. That'd be pretty sweet.
That could be part of the AB phase structure, or that could be like a phase C, like a bonus phase where you don't necessarily get a damage buff, but just by virtue of being able to AoE, you're doing more damage to him before he like reconvenes in some kind of way.
So you just dropped a few buzzwords there in terms of phase structure. You want to explain that a little bit?
Sure. So, like Johnny was saying, there's like an A-B phase structure, which means that he'll do one thing. He'll have like one set of abilities. He'll have one set, like he'll be in his one form, and then he'll shift over to phase B, but then eventually return back to phase A, and then it'll just keep cycling through the fight. And then like a phase C might be like you go through phase A and phase B enough, and then he gets low health, and then he stops going through phase A and B, and then you get a bonus phase C or something like that.
I was just actually thinking about the Tectus idea plus the like pushing you off idea. It'd be kind of neat too, because with one, it would be like push you at like 3 yards a second. But as you get more and more of them, the force, like more of them are pushing us back would be kind of cool. Or maybe just like only one person is pushed at the start, and then towards the end, if there's 3 of them or 4 of them by then, like all of us are getting pushed back by then.
I do really like how that playing off of Tectus and playing off of some of those other elemental bosses we've done before, and I think paying that minor homage to Mercius, right, with the splitting.
The schedule for tomorrow.
I think the thing I really like is it's really chasing after that fantasy of fighting the ocean, right?
What's
We've
the
all been
schedule
kids
for
and tried to
tomorrow?
build a sandcastle on the beach. So this will never fall down. It's been all day on it, and then inevitably it does, right? That keeping the boss's abilities potentially on the simpler side, but then stacking and multiplying against you, and that feeling of being, you know, that race to bring him down before he can multiply enough to bring you down. There's something really cool about that, about capturing that fantasy.
It's also not splitting into lots of little droplets that reform.
Right, it gives it a different flavor than what we've seen before, but it is consistent.
And it doesn't have to be droplets. It could just be smaller versions of himself. He could just be like he's everywhere. He's like a reflection of the ocean. He's in all places at all times. And maybe like you DPS one down and it bursts into water, and then something drops its heart, or who knows, its shackles. Does it have like the classic water elemental bindings of the? Oh, it does. Ooh, and
He was
tentacles.
summoned, right? So
I think, yeah, I think what's really unique about this guy is he has those kind of Cthulhu tentacles, as you call them, going on. So there's definitely this kind of, I mean, from a player side feeling, whatever we know, that there's this kind of, you know, void, old, gaudy kind of presence going on here because of just the way he's structured. And then one of the key pieces we saw earlier was there was that just tiny person on the cliffside fending. It almost even looked like they were just attacking him, ready to stab him with those chin things.
Yeah, so I can imagine that he actually like physically punches the tank. He's not like a caster that's water bolting. He's just like, ugh.
That's interesting. What if going with the tentacles and the idea of like the shadow as well as water idea, right? Like, because we've just been focusing on water. Ted brings up a good point, which is we potentially could play off the shadow kit if we're saying that this guy's some form of corruption or something. But like maybe he's using both water and shadow, right? But then as he's splitting, potentially the water is getting more powerful and the shadow, like something's getting diluted there, right? It's probably not the water because he's just splitting, but maybe the shadow ability that he's using is getting weaker as the water ability is getting stronger or something like that.
Interesting. Or also riffing off of that, what if what you're actually killing is like the corruption, and there's like a dark something in some of the water elementals, and you have to hack through the elementals to find out whether or not they have that corrupted core, or whether they have like that magic nugget or whatever it is that the priest was like, take this.
Like the XT heart just falls.
Yeah. Like,
Well, the shackles that are on the water elemental, that could be the source of its corruption.
yeah, that could be kind of cool.
You wouldn't want to actually punch bracers, but the idea would be like to break the crystal that's in the side of his bracer.
Yeah, maybe that like dispels the illusion or whatever it is that's making the water elemental what it is.
Maybe he can't reform once it's destroyed, and so like maybe you're killing him over and over and over again, but it's destroying the bracers that ultimately beats the fight.
It's like a shell game where there's just infinite ones of them spawning, and you have to keep finding the one that has the bracers on it to kill the one with the bracers, and you're just getting like overwhelmed, and it's splitting, and you don't know what to do, and then all of a sudden they just wash you off the platform.
So the damage you put into the non-bracers one, they just kind of fall down into puddles of water and come back into the
Yeah, that's awesome. Or like when you kill them, they deal splash damage.
No.
Don't encourage her.
I got 1 million of them. I got wave event, I got
So
soak
funny.
mechanic, I got this all day.
So funny.
Just don't talk about soap.
So if we did want to do a C phase, kind of riffing off that idea of finding the corruption, that might be a little bit long for a first boss, but maybe once you do find that source of corruption, right, it reveals its true form or envelops it completely in shadow or something like that, and you get that last burn phase of a void elemental sort of thing, or a void walker sort of thing. There could be something cool there.
I don't know if we need to do A, B, and C for the first boss. I think just doing the A split apart B thing is kind of cool for this guy.
So would there be some kind of, I know it's really satisfying for players a lot of the time, and we had a few instances in Seed of Triumvirate now where there's a kind of big damage intake phase, 200% increased damage, or you get some kind of buff or something. It's usually pretty satisfying, especially for the DPS to have that kind of thing. So I feel like there might be room on this fight to do something with the water theme and, I don't know, air bubbles, whatever it may be, to have that kind of thing.
You could do the kind of thing where you have to pace your DPS, because if you burst one of the elemental adds, then it does do AoE splash damage, as it were. And so if you kill too many at once, then you just wipe, that. Splash.
So I missed a part. We're not doing Tectis 1 to 2, 2 to 4. There's
Could be anything.
tons of little ads.
I think that still works.
Oh, that's just the evil.
The Tectis 1 to 2, 2 to 4, it's just one of them keeps the bracers.
Or sometimes two of them have the bracers, or you just have to seek them out, and there's waves coming at you. It's hard to see. You could even give them that screen effect, whenever you're invisible. Sometimes maybe you're drowning or something, and it's hard for you to see. Not all the time, obviously, but he afflicts you with Curse of the Ocean, drowning or something.
Maybe to riff off of the thing we were talking about earlier, the one with the bracers could be getting more and more shadowed out, basically, or voided out, like you said. So at the end, maybe the Chinticle thing, he's not that at first. He's just a good old water elemental. But then after he splits the first time, the one with the bracers gets more shadowed out because some of the water left and formed these little ads, and then he gets Chinticles or something. And maybe there's a third version of him that is there a character artist? It's fine. There's a third version of him where he becomes purple and more shadowed out, basically.
That's exactly what I was going to say. You could just change his color. It just gradually becomes more purple. That'd be pretty cool to see.
You can even do a cool...
I'm kind of curious. So you're starting with a piece of concept art. You're riffing off of that. But do your ideas cause you to go back to the drawing board and actually reinvent the boss a little bit? Like you talked about, hey, can we have a character artist change this boss a bit?
Yeah, often we're given a piece of concept like this to work with, which is fantastic. I don't think they've created this yet either, so when we do these brainstorms like this, oftentimes we can just come up with new or other ideas, and oftentimes at Blizzard, when you're geeked up enough about an idea, if you can sell someone on how cool this idea is, they're more than happy to make it for us. So in a case like this, if we're like, hey, as well as this guy, what if there was a purple guy? Because we have this really cool idea for the boss where all these mechanics will play into that. They're like, yeah, totally, we got you. So we try not to let that kind of production-related thing get into the brainstorming process too much, because we just want to come up with the best idea we can.
This isn't mechanic heavy. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just mentioning, it'd be cool, we have the idea of him transforming into more and more evil versions. It'd be cool, since we're on the side of the river, of seeing the actual good water of him whenever you phase transition come out and flow into the river
for short
and get
people
away from
and
him.
Yeah, or
let them
maybe
have the heights
he
so
goes
they
off
can
the
see over the
bluff's
crowd
edge and he just becomes
yeah.
enormous or something like that while you're dealing with the little ones. So I just had a thought of just kind of a cool visual moment. It's not a neat mechanic, but he has this animal where he makes the water rise and the orbs of water are coming out like globules or something, and he's just kind of like in Fantasia whenever
literally it just
Mickey's doing
whispers
the
or walking
or
with
a
something about their
a really get it out there, sorry.
That's really
I think
helpful.
this guy actually ends up being more of a void
Something
walker.
above
By the end, you mean?
So he starts as
just
a water elemental and slowly
flash
siphoning
you
him off
restore
to be
chaos and someone
at the end of the fight.
Sure.
Just
Whisper
visually,
someone on
I'm
that
trying to
list.
think what that would-
Sounds like that's,
It's
they
the
both have
easiest
the
way.
same cuff motif. They're kind of controlled by something.
Yeah.
Totally.
Is there a way we could make the shadow and water kind of work together in
John,
some way?
am I alright to bring one of my friends into the guild?
Like, to me, that would be the
Who's
most interesting
recently
thing,
got
is if
back
the
into
shadow,
WoW?
like,
Give me the name
almost
and
was
I
like
can't
opposed to the water, or if
Uh,
they
his
interacted
name's
in some way
Walking
that
Blue.
made the mechanics more
This is just
interesting.
walking blue.
Yeah.
It could be the kind of thing where if you touch bad water, you get debuffed by shadow or something.
it's
Like
not.
you're impure or you're
As long as he is not
unclean
like
in
a
some kind of
sellout
way.
like Wrath.
Is that
you
part of
go.
the
It's
Sea Priest kit? Do they manipulate light and shadow, or
He's
what?
not an ass.
Are they just
He's just trying to get
nautical
used to the
themed?
game again.
It's definitely leaning very much
Bless
on
him,
the
he
nautical
hasn't played
theme.
it
I think
for
if they
3 or
did some
4
of the light
nope.
shadow stuff, it wouldn't be completely inappropriate.
He hasn't played it
But I
since
think doubling
Pandaria.
down on the storm water
That's
theme makes a lot of
for
sense, especially
playing it.
going into that later boss that Scott was talking about, where they're like cleansing themselves. There's something cool about they have some way to
Seth, he
get rid of the
realizes
shadow,
that
but I
it's
think
me
they
that's
would
just
get
got
rid
him
of
the
it in
invite to
some
the
way
guild.
that feels not.
Okay.
The thing you mentioned about the unclean debuff, you could
Well, I
have
finally
the
have my
pools of
second
clean
level
water, and
100.
actually walking into them removes that.
Yeah.
But then you've created a pool of bad
Just
water, and maybe that's
24
what
more to
animates
go,
it as a shadowy apparition
10?
or something like that. Like
10.
Sorry, unrelated, but I just had a random idea. There's a boat, and there's a channel, and there are boats. Would we be able to get them involved somehow? Like, or would that be worth discussing?
they're like shooting their cannons at you
I
as
don't know,
they drive
maybe,
by.
yeah. I mean,
Like on heroic mode, one just comes over and bombards you for no freaking reason
Exactly.
whatsoever. Just like, hey, F you.
Mythic mechanic, maybe? Bunch of cannonballs shooting on the side of the platform, get worse and worse, those kind of soft enrage styles.
Literally, like, you got
Tyrannical
invited
boats.
before him, so. I'm all about.
It's probably a good time for us to just sort of take stock of what you've heard so far. How much of this is kind of sticking with you? What do you want to roll with from this point, Ken?
I think some AB phase version of the fight works out pretty well here. One where he's the big water elemental with the bracers, and after you do some amount of damage or some mechanic to him, he'll break up into a couple different pieces.
It's just
One of
someone
them's the
kill
real one
there
with the
on
bracers that
there,
you're
isn't it?
fighting, and then
Wow, I
after you
just failed.
maybe get his health low, they'll reform up into the big guy. Each time he'll reform up into the big guy, he'll get a little more shadowier than before. Maybe go back and forth a couple times before the fight ends.
What'd you think of Morgan's idea at the end there of rolling in the boat and the cannons?
I think if we were to use the boat, probably be for Heroic Plus. I just worry a little bit about diluting the theme of the guy with the boat.
So I'm kind of curious, and this sounds awesome, sounds very ambitious. Where do you start to draw the line? Where do you say, okay, this is too much for a dungeon. This is the kind of stuff we might save for a raid.
So far what we have doesn't scare me that much. So one of the things that we always try to consider with dungeon bosses is just how much time players get to spend with them, right? So with a dungeon boss, we expect it to really only last like a couple minutes, like two plus-ish minutes. With a raid boss, we're talking about like many minutes, from 6 to on up. So we know that there's a lot more time to let mechanics as well as additional phases breathe. So we have often done like A/B bosses, like where we go from one phase to the next, back to the next, or even just, at 50% health, trigger the next thing, right? That's usually where we try to stop the complexity level for a dungeon boss. So this is pushing it, but I think we're okay.
We also don't want to overload you with mechanics. I think that the rule of 3 is a good number for game design, where you don't want to have someone have more than 3 things in their mind at once. Like, what is my objective? What am I dodging? What else could possibly play off of that? And that's about as far as you want to go for the casual not casual, but the 5-man, possibly pug group mechanic.
And when do you start
Or you can
incorporating
create
the different roles? Like, hey, what's the
orc
tank
that's
doing?
not,
What are the healers
like,
doing?
bent
What's melee?
on the
What's
back
range
now.
doing?
Or in
I think that would be
Normal
like what Ken
sort of.
does. So the way that we describe this sometimes is whenever they do the dungeon layout and they're trying to figure out like who's in the dungeon, you write the 1-sentence version of what this boss is. And then when we sit down and we have this meeting, we come up with the 1-paragraph version of what the boss is. So we say like, okay, it's a water elemental, but also it splits into 3 and it's pushing you off the side. But then Ken would take everything that we're just sort of like vomiting out on stage right now and then turn that into a 1-page design where he decides like, okay, now how is this meaningful to the tank, and how are we making sure we're doing enough damage to keep the healer engaged? We can come up with some cool ideas on how to kit that and how to theme that, but ultimately that would be up to Ken.
So he's boxed you in a little bit now. So you want to spend a little bit more time kind of working within that box?
So no boats.
No boats. Maybe heroic. There's life.
Maybe.
It'll happen maybe.
Heroic boats.
Cool. So we've got. So you're saying, you think when the water splits off, they're going to reform, or is that just adds that we kill, and then the water's gone and he's more corrupted now?
Potentially, it's just ads that you kill that come back in, form back into the main guy. We could even have it split more than once. The way I was thinking in my head is he's the normal water elemental. He'll split once, and then he'll be the evil version of the water elemental. So you only have like A, B, A, and you're done.
Right.
So are you thinking that every time he splits, he comes back and he has less health, and that's how you know that you're progressing on the boss? Or when he turns into the shadow version, is he like a new one with 100% health?
I think you just keep the same health bar the whole time.
Okay.
So when you get him down to say 50, he'll split into him and his buddy essentially, or even more than one buddy. You kill them, he comes back at 50 or whatever damage you've done to him in the meantime.
Yeah, that's good. That's interesting because then that can be one of those things in Mythic Plus when you're really pushing those keystones. Like how many times he submerges can be what pushes you over the edge of killing this boss on time.
So what's the mechanic then to have to kill his buddies? Does he just go immune? Do they take double damage from the cleave? We never really decided, are they immobile or not?
I think we went for he's moving around. As to going immune, typically that doesn't really, or it's hard to make that feel good when players have to switch over because the main guy that you're watching the life bar of goes immune.
I think everyone's
We could
like
even,
starting in
it could
High
even be
Mountain
something
now
like
for their
the side
quests.
guys just do the exact same abilities as the boss, so that's why you want to get rid of them because
I always start High Mountain.
and they're presenting their own threats in some way.
Are you thinking the watery hood
We
open, or
usually
are you
start
gonna pass?
soon.
I'm okay with that.
I started Stormham this time.
Kinda cool.
He could even
Just
like
to
do
get
the
it done.
thing we were talking about before, where he transforms into a wave, goes across the play space, and then comes back up as a water elemental. That way, when you've got like 2 or 4 of them, it's threatening in its own way.
I'm curious. Is this guy? Do you think that he talks? Do you think that he'd like be smack talking to you the whole time, or is he just kind of like this mindless, aberrant horror that's just I kill?
We've done both treatments of elementals before, but I personally kind of prefer when we give them that voice, give them that personality. It can be kind of that raw, powerful, angry sort of vibe that we've seen with Tectis, right? Tectis isn't exactly going out to write a novel, or The Wrath of Azara, or some of those other elemental bosses, right?
Sure.
But I do think it's cool to have him talk, and I think there's a
10
cool opportunity
normal
there
dungeons
as he
gives you 8 for
becomes
the
more
5,
shadow,
so
as he's revealing his
that's
true
pretty
form,
fast.
right? We can kind of have his voice modulate over
Pretty
time,
fast to
so
get
those
gear
sound
from
lines that he's
just
saying or the ability
doing
that he's
dungeons
doing
yourself now.
can take on some of that shadowy effect. If you think back to Yogg-Saron, right, when he's
if you have
revealing
that
his true
stuff.
form, spoilers, at the heart of Ulduar, right? That voice transition is a super awesome moment.
Would you say that the water elemental's voice is deep?
Yes.
We never have any puns in anything that we do in World of Warcraft, by the way.
It was a nice career for a while, so you guys fired Monday.
Morgan, I had an idea to keep the boats.
Oh, I'm in.
Just hear me out here. I like the boats. If players get washed off by the waves, right? I'm assuming it's the wave mechanic is actually what would knock players off.
Yeah.
They get brought back onto the platform by the boats. They get shot out of a cannon back.
Or someone fishes
Like
them
a,
up
like
out
a
of the water.
circus.
Yeah.
Like the Colterans are just like, hey, and then they shoot you in a cannon back onto the. That could be a cool way to hit what is basically just a stun mechanic.
Right. And maybe fighting this guy, or facing that guardian is kind of their ultimate, their rights, right?
And
you can't enter their sanctum, and that's part of the story that we're trying to sell in the zone. Is this is a place where nobody goes except for sea priests, and so we could tie it into conquering that passing that as their test to enter their sanctum.
That's cool. Yeah, because we can't just death touch you or kill you instantly for getting knocked off. It's a dungeon, first boss in the dungeon, no less. It should feel like a timeout. Like, here you go, sit in the corner, jump in the cannon, get back up. All right, you're back in the fight.
I mean, we can. We just be big jerks.
Right. You could always do the water spout, but you could also do a ship.
Yeah.
He could pick the boat up and throw it at you.
With his tentacles.
Going on that a little bit, I kind of like the idea of maybe he leans forward and slams his face down and grabs one person with his tentacles and sort of swallows them inside his watery chest, and you have to save the guy by punching him out. And that's threatening in its own way because if he splits into multiple guys, then
He has
bad
these
times.
he has these two perfectly good hands, but he's just like, I'm gonna get you. I love it.
I have too much
way
satisfaction
creepier.
of kicking
It's
fish into
totally
water.
creepy.
Maybe he puts his hands down next to you and then bites you.
Is that bad?
Jesus.
When you're
Like,
saying putting
normally
his
you're
hands down,
kicking,
it's
yeah,
just kinda, I
somebody
don't
in
want
the
to
face,
completely
but-
resign the fight
No,
now,
I'm
but
kicking
because
the
the
fish in the
bracers are
face
kind of
into the water.
soft spot or what he's enchanted, it's an opportunity
but
for
you're
him
a
to
monk
slam his
too.
hands down and maybe get a bit of extra damage in.
Yeah,
Takes
and I'm a
damage
monk as it
multiplier
is.
on his bracers. And when he does that, his
What
tentacles,
talents are you
because,
going for?
you know, water and stuff kind
I
of can
went
go in the
for
ground.
Chi
And those
Wave,
are your void zones that you avoid.
Tiger's Loss,
Or, you
Power
know,
Strikes, Leg
turn it into a
Sweep,
soak mechanic with
Healing
all of
Elixir,
that.
Hit
It's
Combo,
up to you.
and Chi Orbit.
I knew it was going to happen.
I would
Now
recommend
you're gonna have
Last panel
Tiger,
ever, apparently.
Cheetah Peter.
But
That's
so
right.
there's
Next
just
week,
definitely
healing,
an idea
elixir,
there with the tentacles,
invoke
and
it,
I just
excellent
like
device
focusing on that
tiger,
because
and whirling
that
dragon
art
punch.
is amazing. It looks great, and they're just so obvious on his face. So
Whirling
menacing.
Dragon Punch does
So
actually
you
a
need to
decent
see
amount
those
of
in play
DPS,
somehow.
or at least
It could be
AoE.
the kind of thing where the tentacles, maybe they don't necessarily like he leans over and picks them up, but it's the kind of thing where like it's like a spiraling water looking thing, right? And they like spiral back down
Which
into
ones do you recommend?
if you're standing in
I
water.
had the
I haven't
Tiger.
decided. Have we decided if
Chi
the room is
Torpedo,
like
Power Strike,
chest
or
high, knee
Energizing.
highs, or any water in the room besides him?
I think it's
Cheetah
just a solid
Peter,
like dry platform above
Power
the river
strikes,
itself.
leg
Okay,
sweep.
so I was thinking like they could turn
Healing
into
Elixir.
friggin' chin tornadoes and like go
And
down into the
evoke.
water and then like like funneling you up out of the
Decent for
water and then
self-healing, in my opinion.
It was just a thought.
Changing subjects, we haven't talked about Shadow at all. we really like the Chinticles, but if he's going to do Shadow stuff, we should probably figure out like what that is, right? I think something that Scott mentioned that was a really cool idea is if we're doing the like Hadoken, like
That's
push
what-
off
that's
the
what I'd
platform,
nominate,
can we
'cause
somehow
it's just-
put like shadow
It's
stuff
the
on the ground?
removal
Maybe
of
it
the
snares you so that
impalement.
you can use it to not get pushed off, or it stuns you or something if you touch it, but you want to get stunned so you don't get pushed off, or something weird, or I don't
Like
know.
Yeah, I mean,
the
they can
Bone
give it
Maw
that-
fight in
give
Shadow
it
Moon
to
Burial
other people
Grounds
that
is kind
can
of like
boost.
he's trying to like suck you in like Kirby, you know, and what you want to do is stand in the goo because the goo makes you sticky and then you don't get sucked in. Could be the opposite
Pick-
thing where there's like a shadow
pick
puddle
whatever
on the
you want,
ground
though.
and you're immobile or
I
something like that.
guess,
Which is the
I'm
opposite. Like,
afraid
well,
to
would
try
you
out
rather get
the
pushed off or would you rather
Dragon
take some
Punch.
shadow damage? It's
Seems-
like let them
it seems
decide.
weird from a
Kick
fantasy
the fishy in the
perspective from a player
face.
that you want to
It's
be
really like,
standing in the evil
you need to
shadow
find a
stuff.
way to
So
commonize
instead
like,
of something
using
that'll help you get pushed against
Rising
the wave,
Sun
maybe there
Kick
are
and
gaps in
Fist
the
of
wave that you
Fury.
could naturally dodge,
you
but
get it up.
touching one of those puddles actually amplifies the wave pushing you. So it's a punishment rather than
Alright,
saving
yeah,
you.
okay, I
It just
can
seems kinda
understand why
weird
that's
that,
got a lot of
evil
damage
shadow
in
stuff,
not
why don't
in
you go stand in
brutes.
it?
Interesting. Do you imagine that one of his primary attacks that's just like doing damage to the raid would be shadow, or do you think that it would mostly be water?
I think a cool flavoring thing is
To be
like
fair, the
it could be
monk
water at the beginning, and then when
at
it
the
transforms, it turns
Windwalker
into
spec,
shadow.
That's cool.
Artifact weapon has a lot of
To
damage.
Ted's point, you could do something
Like on
we got
power.
tentacles, so you can get the water version or shadowy version of like maybe something actually
already got
grabs
that
you,
as well,
like physically
which is a bonus.
grabs you. That could be interesting. Like maybe it's even a like big wind up, like you know, Ted, you're gonna get pushed off the platform and you want to go jump on something or get grabbed by something, one of the tentacles maybe, to not get knocked off, or I don't know. I'm just trying to wrap my head around the what is the shadow part of the guy, since we have lots of really strong themes and kit ideas for the water. What's the shadow?
It kind of depends right now because I guess everyone's kind of on board for this wave mechanic pushing you off, but there's
Yeah,
some
just need to
disparity
get
right
them
now
out and have
between
laptops
is
and
it just going to
start
be
doing
one big
Legion
inevitable wave
dungeons.
that goes through, or are there going to be several
then I'm
waves
pretty
and
much
you
good
kind of
to go.
have to Frogger your way through?
Yeah.
And I mean, you can maybe get hit by one, it'll set you back a bit, but ultimately there's maybe 2 or 3 layers that you have to dodge in order to get back to the platform or be safe.
I think splitting those up into 2 different abilities or mechanics is kind of the way to go here. One would be the waves that kind of go across and you dodge them or you take a bunch of damage, and another is kind of like a water jet that he channels on
Getting rid
you
of the
that's
low eye
shooting
level
streams
stuff
of water
before I
trying to
look
push you
at the
towards
slightly
the
higher
edge.
stuff.
So would just him be shooting it, or when he splits, we'd have 2 of them, 3 of them, 4 of them?
Absolutely. You could have a bunch of them channeling on a bunch of different random people, pushing them towards the edge.
So it's like a bullet hell of waves where you're trying to dodge all the bullets, but then when he splits, there's even more of them, and it's your worst nightmare.
Yeah.
So would there be some inherent benefit to not killing those ads? Because I know when we think especially about Mythic Plus, it's all about there's some kind of risk reward and trying to be efficient, even if it's at the risk of perhaps wiping. So would there be some benefit to not having to kill the ads that he splits in, outside of saving some damage because you can funnel it directly into the boss? You know, the risk being, of course, the more there are, the more damage, the more people can get knocked off. But where's the benefit of not doing that? Or is there one? Should there be one?
Yeah, I agree. I'd have to think about it some more, but I I want to lean towards the making killing the ads a bonus and really want to push that rather than let you just tunnel the boss and ignore everything else on the side.
You could do the thing where if you kill one of them, then that's like part of his health, right? So every one of them that you kill is like 5% off of his health, and he could just have an enormous amount of health. And like, I don't know, that maybe that doesn't feel good whenever you're punching him outside of that phase though. Like you're hitting his hit points by like 1% every 6 minutes.
What if the water is normally considered like pure, right? Like holy in a sense? And there's a mechanic I really liked from Il'gynoth where you're taking the ads to the edge of the actual boss's domain and you're killing them there, so location actually matters.
Yeah.
There could be something cool where when the ads die, they explode, right? A big splash of water. And particularly the more voided out the main boss is, the more damage he takes from this holy water. We kind of play off of that theme.
Oh, interesting. Like
maybe they always hurt him some, but like the closer they are to him, the more damage they're doing to him.
Like the water is the antithesis to the shadow.
Right, which could tie in really cool to the kind of rest of the dungeon and sell that like there's a stark difference between those two things.
Just trying to figure out a way to sell that mechanically in the fight.
Right.
It's cool.
Just something about that risk reward, right? Of like,
Yeah.
oh, if they're both doing waves, having them close together is bad, but taking advantage of the extra damage could be like on Mythic Plus, that could be a great time savings if you have the skill to do that.
So the ads are mobile, right? The boss and the splitting and everything's mobile. They're not stationary.
Yeah, I imagine so.
So how, I mean, at the end of the day, then from a party perspective, what the tank just, I mean, the proximity issue here is kind of weird if they're mobile, because what does the tank do? Just picks all of them up and you just AoE them down on top of the boss.
Maybe.
It could be the kind of thing where the boss is mobile, but the ads just choose not to. Like maybe they're casters, or maybe they're just busy, like channeling waves, or perhaps Hadokening you a couple of times. And then when the boss is out, he's actually kind of dangerous, and maybe he can even walk around during that phase and punch you and be dangerous in some kind of way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Like
I
a
like that idea.
minefield of his own elementals, a minefield of his own spawn.
Where they're all probably just channeling, right? But then if you have a blood DK or whatever, good for you. You can gore fiends them all together. So like, if you're on your blood DK that day, yes, you can do that. But otherwise, they're probably just channeling on a bunch of people, which makes
Do
sense.
you try to work in any kind of class specifics? Like you just mentioned, if you had a DK there.
Yeah.
I mean, you go through each of the classes and think about, okay, what would happen if we, happen to have a hunter, or we had a demon hunter in here?
Yeah, with dungeons in particular, we're always we try to let everything fly and let as many things work as we can. Especially when we're coming up with things for dungeons, we try to find ways to have multiple solutions for a problem. So maybe there's like an ad that has a lot of health, but you could purge it to kill it, or if you don't have a purge, you can just punch it. But we often try to think of it from the perspective of like giving you multiple solutions to the problem where possible. A lot of that stuff also comes from feedback and play tests, and we're like, hey, that was really hard without X. Okay, well, how do we like incorporate some other way to solve that problem?
So I know people are going to ask, every one of us plays, we all have our favorite class, and yet you're the evil minds behind these encounters. How do you make sure that you aren't having some sort of favoritism towards your own classes?
The people sitting here will all play different things as well. So usually we're pretty good about saying like, hey, that's really mean to melee. I'm gonna give you feedback. That's really mean to melee. Please keep that in mind, even though you might not be that specific with a certain spec or something like that. So really we just lean on each other for that kind of feedback, and also the community, and where we get no lack of feedback in that regard.
And that's also the kind of thing that we can iron out. Like even if we don't somehow perfectly design the boss the first time, once we're playtesting it ourselves, we have the melees, we have the casters, we have all sorts of comps that we try. And if something doesn't work out, we're not afraid to just scrap it and start over.
So we're probably at the point where you need to make some decisions. I'd like to give Ted an opportunity to sort of voice in community perspective on what we've figured out here. So you want to kind of sum it up? Actually, all of you can kind of weigh in. Where are we? What is this boss all about?
Which ideas do you like the most?
Ken, you have to make it. What do you think?
I like the idea of that we originally hit on with the AB. He's got maybe 3 abilities or so in A phase. When you do get him down to 50, or maybe it's timed, we can do it by the energy bar and show his like water power underneath his health. He'll split into a couple dudes. Potentially just 2, but maybe more if we want to get crazy. Maybe in Heroic Plus. But they all share his abilities, and when you damage them, it somehow damages him either by copying their damage onto him or they explode and you have to bring him over, that sort of thing. After you deal with all of those, he'll reform back up into his main guy at whatever amount of health. You'll bring him down to 0 and win, hopefully.
Ideally.
Hopefully.
Okay. Ted, what do you think? Feedback?
I was kidding. I mean, it sounds great. No, there's obviously there's always a bit of a disconnect between how you guys imagine things and what the players end up finding at home. It could be bugs, could be just something didn't come to image. I guess maybe a couple of concerns that stick out for this fight, and definitely feel free to chime in how you guys deal with these challenges, designing bosses in general, because so for this one, for instance, it's kind of a role-specific, more of a role-specific concern. Definitely, huge advantage here with bringing a multi-dot class. If we're going to have a bunch of ads that are initially immobile. If you have a DK, great. What if you don't have a DK? Are we going to be able to silence the mobs to bring them in or not? Is it just going to turn into a cleave fest? And is there going to be RNG for where the ads spawn? Third boss seat of Triumvirate comes to mind right now. There's definitely a lot of RNG and frustration sometimes in where those tentacles spawn. That really kind of makes it very unattractive, honestly, to bring melee. So then melee players get frustrated, especially when they're trying to compete in higher Mythic Plus dungeons. So how would you guys try to approach some of those concerns for this?
So when we're talking about things like roles, for instance, in dungeons, one of the things we often think about and discuss when we're talking about dungeon bosses in particular is we think of a dungeon as a whole the same way that we might think of an individual raid boss, right? So where on an individual raid boss, some of those concerns that you brought up, it would just, what's my answer? Like, what if I'm not so great on this fight? Well, the answer there is not as fun as it might be in a dungeon where you can just say, yeah, well, don't worry, the next boss, that's where you get to shine. So when we talk about dungeon bosses in particular, we always try to think of it as like, okay, this is a really tank heavy, like a tank mechanic heavy boss, right? This is one where the tank and the healer are gonna carry us through this. It might not have as much for a DPS in particular, but then maybe the boss right after that will, right? As long as we hit all those beats, and sometimes it's even good to have those peaks and valleys for an individual where it's like, okay, that boss is really hard for me. Okay, cool, this next boss, Scott and Ken are gonna carry me because they're the DPS and they're gonna be killing all the ads, and it's not as difficult for me. So that's usually how we think of a dungeon versus a raid in particular.
Okay. So what's the healer doing on this fight? We didn't really talk about it. I mean, as the tank, I can kind of see a situation where maybe you want to move the boss a bit, or maybe you can kind of, players always discover things like let's tank the boss against the wall because it eliminates 180 degrees of where those ads can spawn, unless you guys predetermine the ads to spawn somewhere in the room. So I can see some tank mobility going on. It'll crush the tank because it's this big behemoth water guy. DPS obviously important. They want to get those water images down, make sure that there's not too much damage. But what's the healer doing the whole time outside of healing the tank? It seems like we haven't really decided. I mean, is there going to be some kind of damage on the raid, some kind of dot going on, or is the healer just going to be wrath for minor amounts of damage in the meantime?
It's very likely that there's going to be some sort of party damage going on, whether that comes in the form of he randomly targets a person and water bolts them or something. This is kind of like the thing we talked about where whatever he's spamming the party with after the transition, it turns into shadow from water. So could be easy as a random targeted water bolt, or it could be just like he slams the ground, water hits everyone.
Okay. There's also that whole shadow side of it. We never really nailed down something that we were super happy about, but I think that's still a strong theme here. And often shadow has to do a lot with healing, like whether it be healing reduction effects or healing absorb effects, or even just something as simple as like a dot, right? You could say that dot is really weak at the beginning of the fight, or it's not super damaging at the beginning of the fight, but then as he gets more and more powerful, maybe it hits more targets. So by the end of the fight, your healer's just like, oh my god, whack them all. So that's things like that. I think are still things that, like Kenneth mentioned, when we get to the like one paragraph version of this boss, that's a thing we'll dive a lot deeper on.
Okay. So I guess kind of in that same vein, there's always a concern of, I mean, there's such a wide range of mobility between the different classes and roles themselves. And with this kind of wave mechanic of getting pushed back, right? Some classes will just have an advantage, bring a Guardian Druid, they can roar through them, Hunters disengage with them, Mages blink, etc., etc. Whereas the poor DK and priests in the background are slowly drowning and getting pushed away. See you guys later. But so where do you, I mean, you'll never be able to design a fight that satisfies everything. It's just impossible. But where do you guys, especially for a first dungeon boss, where do you kind of draw the line on what's okay? Like, what is too much that we're really making those low mobility classes suffer a bit too much here? Or we're letting, things like Guardian Druids, whatever, shine a bit too much, maybe? Like, where do you draw that line for these kind of encounters?
I think for dungeons, it's just a question of, is it mandatory or not? Like, is it a bonus that I can run and that I don't have to hit my W button to stay going forward as much? Or is it just guaranteed gonna throw me off the ledge if I don't have a run speed buff? Like, obviously, that's just kind of like a tuning knob where you decide whether or not, moving is a bonus or if it's necessary.
Yeah, we're always looking for ways to make it feel like really good about having a specific class with you, especially with mechanics. But not only that, like with the dungeon, we have all kinds of opportunities to fit that kind of thing in. Like with Court of Stars was a dungeon that we were experimenting with a lot in terms of like how much class and profession and different mechanics can we put in to make people feel really cool about what they can bring to the fight. So that's always a place where we're looking to have opportunities there. Like Candace said, with the dungeon, I don't think we would ever consider it like mandatory that a thing is there. It would just be like, cool, if you have this, you can skip this ads phase, or if you have this, you can, CC those ads until we kill the boss, and that saves us a little bit of efficiency.
Cool. Actually, I'm glad you mentioned Court of Stars, just kind of, not really off topic because it's related to dungeons, but was that kind of model or experiment, was that successful in your guys' mind? Is that the kind of thing you might want to explore going forward? Because it certainly added a pretty cool, unique flavor on a dungeon that we usually don't see. Because dungeons in a lot of players' heads are, well, you start, there's trash, we kill a boss, there's trash, we kill a boss. So it's cool to see this kind of twist. Do you guys, is that something you might work on in the future and try to have some different mechanics of the dungeons themselves?
I thought Court of Stars was very successful, and it's a really fun dungeon, and we use it as a reference for dungeons we're talking about in Battle for Azeroth, of like how can we incorporate those kind of things. Obviously we have to consider like Mythic Plus runs and what happens to the group where no one knows what's going on, and are they able to be successful still, but I think it was good.
So I guess more in your territory than Johnny. In terms of lore and aesthetics, some players don't care. I care though. I like going in a room and feeling like I'm in this shadow-corrupted water ledge and things are really dangerous. So how important is it for you guys to kind of develop these environments, really well for the players to go in and be like, wow, I mean, we've just done a ton of Antorus testing now for the BTR, just kind of as an example leading into this. And going on Agrimar's platform was just mind-blowing. Or going upstairs to Argus was like, oh, this just looks awesome. I don't even care if the fight's like really bad. This is just great, Not that the fight is bad, I'm just saying. So how much attention do you guys pay to these kind of environments so the players really feel, I mean, this is a role-playing game. Players really want to feel like they're invested in the environment and that it's cool in a creepy environment, whatever it may be. So in this case, it would have to be this kind of, ledge with water and wind, and you feel it really unstable. So how much do you guys pay attention to that?
We actually pay an immense amount of attention to that, but both in our dungeons and in the outdoor world too, right? It really takes the entire development team to really sell that fantasy, right? Like you mentioned, we're a role-playing game, and we've been talking a lot recently as we're developing Battle for Azeroth about how do we make sure that we're always capturing that fantasy, that I am playing this class and I'm in this world, and this world is a real place and feels real, and it has its own problems and things I care about, right? So it kind of varies on the specific situation, but it can be as simple as the dungeon artist that made Agrimar's room made it just super incredible, right? Or the character artist that made this boss here just made the shinticles so incredibly intricate and they wrap around so interestingly that you can't look away from it, right? But it's something that we think about a lot. And for all those people out there that don't read quest text, or they're not caring what the story is necessarily, it's just not their thing, that's completely cool, because our job as storytellers at the end of the day is that you cannot help but understand what's going on. The goal is that if you're listening to music and talking to your friends and all those wonderful things that we do while we're enjoying games and playing World of Warcraft, you can't help but notice what's going on. You can't help but be like, man, that room was really cool. What was that guy again? Who is that? Who's Agrimar? And then you go on the best 6-hour journey of your life figuring out all the answers to that. So hopefully,
six is hopeful.
You can't help but absorb what's going on. Like there's like some ocean stuff happening, and I'm pretty sure that those dudes
a bit of lore.
Betrayed those other dudes. What was that all about? And that's totally enough for us.
Like from the Warcraft
this is
era.
We probably need to draw the brainstorm to an end. I really appreciate all of you doing this. I know that we would normally have a lot of meetings, and you do this over many, many hours to decide what the mechanics are. And certainly we haven't had to do this in front of a large crowd, so that's awesome, because I really did not rehearse this boss at all, so these ideas were raw. But thank you so much. I'm curious though, I think everyone wants to know, what happens next? Once you figure this out, what's the next step?
Yeah, so we usually have a couple of these meetings where we talk about individual bosses or dungeon bosses and mechanics like this. At that point, we then hand it off to Ken, who will go work on what we call a paper design, which is where he really just takes, anywhere from a couple of hours to a couple of days to just work out all the details about what this boss is going to be doing, what each role is going to do, what all the mechanics are. At that point, he sends out an email to the team, and we send feedback back. We iterate on that quite a bit, up until the point where you're ready to start implementing and putting it in the game, and then we can play test it and get it into our community's hands.
Normal
and go from there.
Very cool. So we're gonna bring this to an end. Some of us are gonna hang out over by the arch there at Darkmoon Faire if you want to ask questions or have some comments. With any luck, everything we talked about tonight will be in that dungeon boss exactly as we described it, with no changes. But there might be a few changes, but you can be rest assured that you helped us put together a cool boss tonight. So thank you.
Thank you for attending the World of Warcraft Boss Design Workshop panel. Up next, closing ceremonies from the Mythic stage.
That was just one of the best Overwatch matches I've ever experienced, playing or viewing.
It was nuts, right?
Bro, like the gameplay, it was high level. I feel like this is a great way to set the stage for Overwatch League.
Yep.
A lot of people now know what high level play looks like. You know, and everybody was firing on all cylinders.
Then, of course, you look at the semi-final games. We had Canada 3-2 against Sweden. Unfortunately, Sweden not able to do better than in 2016 when they walked away with a bronze medal. And then South Korea walked through France 3-1. And we'll talk a little bit about that bronze medal match. It's Sweden again taking home that bronze medal.
Yeah. You know, Sweden, was another team that a lot of people were expecting to do some damage, but they were a different team than the rest of the Overwatch World Cup. They had to make some roster changes coming in here, and I feel like it definitely played a role in the later stages of the tournaments as the teams got harder. Canada, man, I don't know what it was about them. They just played from behind the entire time. It was like they were sitting on their keyboards for the first 2 matches, literally playing from behind, and then they would just bring it back.
It was crazy, right? Because you watch that South Korea game and you're thinking, okay, all right, a little bit of life here and there, and all of a sudden Canada just continuously refusing to die, but in the end, it was South Korea. They go back-to-back champions, and I feel like they deserve that too.
Yeah, they do deserve it, man. Those guys put in the work, and it was apparent. You could just see by the adjustments that they made. Flower had a Jordan-esque type performance. Yeah. I gotta say, man, because he's such a young guy, and for him to be able to just deal with all the pressure, to change on the fly the way he was, man, it was great.
It was beautiful to watch. It really was. Of course, for Canada, they go from top 12 in 2016 to second in 2017. Pretty impressive improvement, if I say so myself. Moving on, though, we should talk a little bit about StarCraft 2. Of course, that grand final did just conclude, and I'm going to be honest with you. When you look at that bracket, a couple of big things to note. Big names missing.
Yes.
First of all, we didn't talk about that yesterday, but we should. There's some huge names. No need, for example.
No need. The U.S. champion, everybody's U.S. hope. He wasn't there. No stats.
No stats. No dart.
No dart.
Like what?
These are big names.
Huge names not in that bracket. And one of the biggest upsets when you look at the round 1 games for me has to be Innovation falling in round 1. He was so confident. All the interviews you saw him do saying, yep, this is my tournament. I'm going to walk away with the prize money. And he falls round 1.
He wasn't wrong. This was his tournament to win. And I mean, like I said, the nerves, man. Yeah. You get mentally exhausted after a while as the pressure builds up. And I feel like Innovation is just another one of those guys who just could not handle it.
Of course, coming into today, Special was the foreign hope. And going into that match against Sue, the odds were very much stacked in his favor. Obviously, that's a Terran versus Zerg matchup, and it's Special's best match, statistically speaking. That's a 20-4 win-loss, and it was Sue's worst matchup as well, Zerg versus Terran at 3-6. So I was sat there going, all aboard the foreign hype train, choo-choo, next stop, foreign champion here at BlizzCon for the first time ever. But Malik, that didn't last long. You got 3-0.
Yeah. I mean, again, the pressure, and I think Sue was really hungry to get back to the finals. He wanted that win. He wanted to, because I mean, we could talk about the storyline with Sue.
Yes.
There's some stuff going on with him finishing, closing.
That's definitely the truth. It's what, 6 GSL Grand Finals. I mean, another final here. He gets to it and just can't close. And it's remarkable because at moments in that matchup, in that grand final against Rogue, you think he does have it in the bag. You think he looks comfortable, but it just wasn't the case. And the storyline for Rogue is absolutely remarkable. It really is. This is a player that hadn't even qualified. He had to get the last 2 events. He had to win the last 2 events to get enough points. Unbelievable.
Look, championships are not to be consumed by children who cannot close out. So if you choke, that's your fault, man. He choked.
Malik Forte with the words of wisdom, ladies and gentlemen. Moving on to World of Warcraft. Of course, that was ABC's championship. And boy, oh boy, did they storm through Panda Global in the finale. But it is worth mentioning the big upsets that came. Neither Method squad make it to the grand final. Method Triforce were going for a 3-peat, weren't able to get past Panda Global. Method Synergy, who at that point, when that result came through, everyone was like, yeah, this is Synergy's tournament now. ABC beat them. It was crazy scenes, Malik.
It was crazy scenes. I don't want to take anything away from Panda Global.
Right.
I feel like ABC's championship is, you got to put an asterisk by it, because Method Triforce had a really awkward game against Panda Global.
True.
That did not look like them. And they won that lottery because after Panda Global was able to win that, it pretty much was a free match for ABC.
Very true. The one thing I will say is Panda Global had one of them championship Saturday kind of days or championship Sunday kind of days where everything started to click. You could tell by the energy that they had, and to make it to the grand final was, props to them for that. But ABC came through and it stormed past them, that's for sure. Now, moving on, Heroes of the Storm. This, for me, is one of the most intense brackets that we had, of course. Big thing to note, Team Expert 2-0 Team Dignitas round 1 caused a massive upset. And Fnatic game that followed that versus Tempo Storm, Fnatic actually went down 1-0 in that as well.
They were struggling.
It was a ridiculous game.
They were struggling. You know, NA teams are back when it comes to Heroes of the Storm. Everybody was saying, like I said before, in Atlanta of the Free, But Tempo Storm, everybody got better. All the NA teams got better, and Tempo Storm, I feel like they showed up the most and really showed that they're still one of the big dogs when it comes to Heroes of the Storm.
It was worried coming into today because, of course, we knew that we were going to have Fnatic versus Ballistics. Ballistics were, at the time, the reigning champions here at BlizzCon 2017. And after watching Fnatic potentially, I don't want to say struggle, but it seemed to be like some speed bumps against Tempo Storm, I thought that that game, honestly, was going to be a lot closer.
Yes.
But the Fnatic that you saw back in Kiev really, really came out here. They steamrolled through Ballistics 3-0.
Right.
MVP Black, you look at that bracket. I mean, they made it look easy the whole time. But the final, I want to get your opinion. Was that an upset for you there? Did you think Fnatic had this one in the bag?
Against MVP Black? No. And I'm going to be honest with you, I was surprised that they got past the Ballistics. That's been their demon, getting through Korean teams. And the fact that they were able to do that against the Ballistics, I feel like they might have left a little bit too much emotion in that matchup.
Right,
So going against MVP Black, another strong Korean team, it was kind of like it ran its course, you know?
Good point, good point. I know MVP Black are going to be ecstatic with that last win, of course. The last time those two teams actually played